What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors gets ambushed on live television by a host who thinks she can say whatever she wants? In just 33 seconds, Lara Spencer went from morning show darling to the most talked about villain in daytime TV history. This is the story of how a simple interview turned into an absolute disaster and how Morgan Freeman decided he had finally had enough. It started like any other Good Morning America segment. The cameras were rolling, the studio audience was buzzing with excitement, and Morgan Freeman walked onto that set with the grace and dignity he always brings. The man is a legend, an icon, someone who has given us some of the greatest performances in cinema history. He sat down in that chair expecting a normal conversation about his latest project, maybe some laughs, maybe some interesting questions about his career. What he got instead was something nobody could have predicted. Lara Spencer came out with all smiles, waving to the audience, soaking up the applause. She settled into her seat across from Morgan, and right from the beginning, something felt off. There was this energy, this weird tension that you could almost feel through the screen. Morgan greeted her politely, shook her hand, gave that warm smile of his that puts everyone at ease. But Lara, she had this look in her eyes, like she had an agenda. The interview started innocently enough. Lara asked him about his new film, and Morgan began talking about the character he played, the emotional depth of the story, the incredible cast he got to work with. He was thoughtful, articulate, giving real answers that showed how much he cared about his craft. The audience was hanging on every word. This is what people tuned in for. This is what Morgan Freeman does best. But then Lara interrupted him, just cut him off mid-sentence while he was explaining something meaningful about the director's vision. She laughed, this dismissive little laugh, and said, okay, but let's talk about something people actually care about. The audience went quiet. Morgan paused, clearly caught off guard. He tilted his head slightly, that signature move of his, and said, I'm sorry? Lara waved her hand like she was swatting away his confusion. Come on, Morgan. Nobody wants to hear about the boring behind-the-scenes stuff. Let's get into the good stuff. She leaned forward with this conspiratorial grin. Let's talk about your age. You could see it on his face, that flash of disbelief. Morgan Freeman has been in this industry for decades. He has sat through thousands of interviews. He knows how to handle difficult questions, awkward moments, pushy journalists. But this was something else entirely. He kept his composure though. He's a professional. He smiled politely and said, My age? I'm not sure what that has to do with the film. Lara laughed again, louder this time. Oh, come on. You're what, 80-something now? Don't you think you're getting a little old to be playing action heroes? She actually said that, on live television, to Morgan Freeman. The studio went dead silent. You could hear someone in the audience gasp. Morgan's smile faded. He straightened up in his chair and looked at her with those eyes, those powerful eyes that have commanded the screen for 50 years. I don't think age defines what roles someone can or cannot play, he said calmly. It's about the story, the character, the performance. But Lara wasn't done. She kept pushing. Sure. But don't you think audiences want to see younger actors, fresher faces? I mean, how many more years can you really keep doing this? The audacity of it, the sheer disrespect. Here was a woman who had built her career sitting behind a desk, reading teleprompters, questioning a living legend about his relevance. Morgan took a deep breath. You could see him processing what was happening, trying to figure out if this was really going where he thought it was going. I think audiences appreciate good storytelling regardless of the age of the actors involved, he replied, his voice steady but with an edge now, a warning. Lara either didn't notice or didn't care. She plowed forward like a bulldozer. Let me ask you this, she said, leaning back in her chair with this smug expression. Do you ever feel like maybe it's time to retire, to step aside and let the next generation take over? I mean, you've had a great run, but everything has to end sometime, right? The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats now. This wasn't fun anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was painful to watch. Morgan looked at her for a long moment, and you could see the wheels turning in his head. He was deciding something, making a choice about how to respond to this level of unprofessionalism. Lara, he said slowly, deliberately, I came here today to talk about a film that I'm very proud of. A film that took years to make. That tells an important story. That features incredible performances from a talented cast and crew. I did not come here to be insulted. Lara's eyes widened. She tried to backtrack, realizing maybe she had gone too far. Insulted? No, Morgan. I'm just asking questions. This is what we do in interviews. We ask the tough questions. Tough questions? Morgan repeated. Tough questions would be about the themes of the film, the creative process, the challenges of bringing the story to life. What you're doing is being rude. The audience started clapping. Actual applause for Morgan calling her out. Lara's face went red. She was losing control of her own show, and she knew it. But instead of gracefully moving on, instead of apologizing, she doubled down. Well, I'm sorry you can't handle a real conversation, she snapped. Maybe if you're too sensitive for basic questions, you shouldn't be doing interviews. That was it. That was the moment. Morgan Freeman, one of the most patient, gracious men in Hollywood, had reached his limit. He stood up, just stood right up from his chair while the cameras were still rolling. The audience gasped again, louder this time. What are you doing? Lara asked, her voice going shrill. I'm leaving, Morgan said simply. He started unhooking his microphone, pulling the wire through his jacket with calm, measured movements. I have spent my entire career treating people with respect. I expect the same in return, and I'm not going to sit here and let you continue to disrespect me on national television. Lara shot up from her own chair, panic flooding her face. The producers were probably screaming in her earpiece. This was live TV. This was a disaster. Morgan, wait, you can't just leave. We're in the middle of a segment. He handed the microphone to a stagehand who looked absolutely terrified. I can, and I am. Thank you for your time. He turned to the audience and gave them a small wave. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry you had to witness this. The audience erupted in applause. Standing ovation. People were cheering for him as he walked toward the exit. Lara was standing there alone on her set, abandoned, humiliated, and she was furious. You could see it written all over her face. This is unbelievable, she shouted, her voice cracking. You can't just walk out on me. Do you know who I am? This is my show. Morgan stopped. He turned back to look at her one last time. And in that deep, resonant voice that has narrated our dreams and our nightmares, he said, Yes, it is your show. And that's exactly the problem. Then he walked off the set, just walked right out of that studio while the cameras captured every second of it. Lara was left standing there, mouth open, completely stunned. The producers cut to commercial, but it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew what had happened. When they came back from the break, Lara tried to act like nothing had happened. She plastered on that fake smile and said something about technical difficulties, about scheduling conflicts, about how they'd have to reschedule with Morgan another time. But nobody was buying it. The audience had been there. They had watched the whole thing unfold. And within minutes, people were already posting about it online, sharing clips, dissecting every word, every expression, every brutal second of that confrontation. The thing is, Morgan Freeman didn't owe her anything. He didn't owe her his time, his patience, or his tolerance for disrespect. He's earned his place in this industry through decades of exceptional work, through bringing depth and humanity to every role he's ever played. He's won awards, broken barriers, inspired generations of actors and filmmakers. And here was Lara Spencer, acting like she had the right to tear him down, to question his relevance, to make him feel small on her little morning show. But he didn't let her. That's the beautiful part of this whole thing. He stood up for himself. He drew a line and said, "This far and no further." And when she crossed it anyway, he left. He took his dignity and he walked out that door with his head held high while she was left scrambling to save face. People started analyzing every moment of that interview. They noticed how Lara's questions weren't just inappropriate, they were calculated. She wanted to create a moment. She wanted drama. She thought she could push one of the most respected men in Hollywood, and he would just take it because that's what guests do. They sit there and smile and answer whatever questions the host throws at them, no matter how insulting or degrading. But Morgan Freeman isn't just any guest. He's someone who has commanded respect his entire career, not by demanding it, but by earning it, by being professional, by being talented, by being kind to people around him. And when someone treats him like garbage, he doesn't stick around for more. The audience that day saw exactly what kind of person Lara Spencer is when she doesn't get her way. They saw the entitlement, the arrogance, the complete lack of self-awareness. She actually thought she could talk to him like that and get away with it. She thought her position as host gave her some kind of immunity, some right to be cruel. What makes this even more telling is how Morgan handled himself throughout the entire ordeal. He didn't yell, he didn't curse, he didn't make a scene beyond simply removing himself from a toxic situation. He stated his boundaries clearly and calmly, and when those boundaries were violated, he acted. That's dignity. That's class. That's what a real professional looks like. Lara, on the other hand, showed her true colors. The moment she realized she was losing control, she lashed out. She got defensive. She tried to blame Morgan for being too sensitive instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, she had crossed a line. Multiple lines, actually. She burned a bridge with one of the most beloved actors in the world because she couldn't resist trying to create a viral moment. And she got her viral moment, all right, just not the kind she wanted. Instead of being remembered as the host who got Morgan Freeman to open up or share something interesting, she'll forever be remembered as the host who was so rude, so disrespectful, that Morgan Freeman walked off her show. That's her legacy now. That's what people will think of when they hear her name. The really fascinating thing is watching Morgan's body language throughout the whole interview. At first, he's relaxed, open, ready to have a good conversation. Then you see him start to tense up as Lara's questions get more aggressive. His shoulders stiffen. His smile becomes more fixed. He's trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But she just keeps pushing and pushing. When he finally stands up, there's no hesitation, no second guessing. He's made his decision and he's following through. That's what happens when you back someone into a corner. When you give them no choice but to either sit there and accept disrespect or stand up and leave. Morgan chose to leave. And in doing so, he sent a powerful message not just to Lara Spencer, but to every host, every interviewer, every person who thinks they can treat guests however they want. The audience reaction tells you everything you need to know about who was right in this situation. They didn't boo Morgan. They didn't tell him to sit back down. They applauded him. They cheered for him. Because they recognized what was happening. They saw someone being mistreated, and they saw that person refuse to tolerate it. That's something people can respect, regardless of who you are or what you do. Lara's reaction after Morgan left was equally revealing. Instead of taking a moment to reflect, instead of showing any kind of humility or self-awareness, she tried to spin it. She tried to make herself the victim. You can't just walk out on me. As if Morgan owed her something. As if he was somehow in the wrong for refusing to sit there and be insulted. That kind of entitlement is staggering. To genuinely believe that your role as host means people have to endure whatever you throw at them. To think that someone's time and dignity are less important than your segment, your ratings, your ego, that's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just cruelty dressed up as content. What Morgan did that day was brave. It would have been easier to just grit his teeth and get through it, to answer her terrible questions with grace and leave quietly when the interview was over. But he didn't do that. He called it out in real time. He said, "This is not okay, and I'm not participating in it anymore." That takes courage, especially when you're in the middle of a live broadcast with millions of people watching. And the way he did it matters too. He wasn't petty. He wasn't mean. He was firm but respectful, even when Lara clearly didn't deserve respect at that point. He thanked the audience. He calmly explained his position. He didn't storm off in a rage. He simply refused to be part of something that was designed to demean him. Think about what that interview could have been. Morgan Freeman has lived an incredible life. He's worked with the greatest directors, actors, and writers of multiple generations. He's been part of films that have shaped our culture, that have made us think, made us feel, made us see the world differently. There were a million interesting questions Lara could have asked, a million directions that conversation could have gone that would have been fascinating and engaging and worthwhile. But instead, she chose to focus on his age, to question his relevance, to suggest he should retire, to essentially tell him that his time had passed and he should make way for younger people. Can you imagine the level of disrespect that requires? To say that to someone who has achieved what he's achieved, who has given what he's given to his craft, and for what? For ratings? For a controversial soundbite? For the chance to be edgy and provocative? It's so short-sighted, so foolish. Because what Lara didn't understand, what she clearly still doesn't understand, is that respect matters more than controversy. Building bridges matters more than burning them. And treating people with basic human decency matters more than any viral moment ever could. The contrast between these two people couldn't be clearer. Morgan Freeman, who has spent decades earning respect through excellence, humility, and professionalism, and Lara Spencer, who threw away whatever credibility she had in pursuit of a cheap thrill. One of them will be remembered as a legend. The other will be remembered for this. What's particularly striking is how unnecessary the whole thing was. Morgan wasn't being difficult, he wasn't dodging questions or being evasive. He was trying to have a genuine conversation about his work. He was giving real answers, thoughtful responses. He was being everything you'd want in a guest. And Lara just couldn't leave well enough alone. She had to poke, had to prod, had to see how far she could push before something broke. Well, something broke all right, and it wasn't Morgan Freeman. It was the illusion that Lara Spencer deserved to sit in that chair, asking those questions, hosting that show. Because a real host knows how to make their guests feel comfortable. A real host knows how to ask challenging questions without being insulting. A real host understands that the interview isn't about them, it's about the guest and the audience and the conversation that happens between them. Lara made it all about her, her questions, her agenda, her need to create drama. And when Morgan refused to play along, she couldn't handle it. She melted down on live television because someone dared to set boundaries with her. Someone dared to say, "No, I won't accept this treatment." The silence in that studio after Morgan stood up was deafening. You could feel the shock rippling through the room. Nobody expected it. Nobody saw it coming. But once it happened, once Morgan made that choice, it felt inevitable, like watching dominoes fall. Of course he was going to leave. How could he not? What other option did she give him? And when he thanked the audience on his way out, that was the final nail in the coffin for Lara, because it showed that Morgan understood who really mattered in that room. Not the host, not the producers. The people who had taken time out of their day to be there, to watch, to engage. He respected them, even if Lara didn't respect him. That's leadership. That's character. The moment when Lara said, "Do you know who I am? This is my show," will live in infamy, because it revealed everything. It showed that she believed her title, her position, gave her power over others. That being the host meant she could treat people however she wanted, and they'd have to take it. But power without respect is nothing. And titles without character are meaningless. Morgan's final line, "Yes, it is your show," and that's exactly the problem, was perfect, absolutely perfect. Because it summed up everything that was wrong with that interview, with Lara's approach, with the whole toxic dynamic she had created. The problem wasn't technical difficulties or scheduling conflicts or any of the excuses she tried to make later. The problem was her attitude, her questions, her complete inability to treat a guest with basic decency. Walking off that set was Morgan Freeman's way of taking back his power, his dignity, his self-respect. Lara tried to take those things from him with her questions, with her implications that he was too old, too irrelevant, too past his prime. But you can't take those things from someone unless they let you. And Morgan didn't let her. He held on to who he was, what he stood for, and he refused to compromise those things for anyone. That's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about a bad interview or a rude host. It's about standing up for yourself when it would be easier not to. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It's about dignity in the face of disrespect, grace under pressure, and the courage to walk away from something that doesn't serve you. Morgan Freeman taught everyone watching a valuable lesson that day. You don't have to tolerate mistreatment. You don't have to smile and nod while someone tears you down. You don't have to sacrifice your self-respect for someone else's entertainment. You can say no. You can set boundaries. You can leave. And there's power in that. There's strength in knowing when to walk away. Lara Spencer learned a different lesson, though whether she actually absorbed it is another question entirely. She learned that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people badly and expect them to stick around, that respect is earned, not demanded, and that sometimes the person you're interviewing has more integrity in their little finger than you have in your entire body. The image of Morgan Freeman calmly unhooking his microphone while Lara panicked behind him will be seared into television history. It's a moment of pure justice, of someone finally saying enough is enough. It's what everyone wishes they could do when faced with a bully, a tyrant, someone who abuses their position. Morgan did it for all of us. And the standing ovation from the audience? That was them saying, "We see you, we understand what just happened, and we're with you." That was validation, that he made the right choice, that he read the room correctly, that this wasn't him being oversensitive or difficult. This was him responding appropriately to an inappropriate situation. The beauty of this whole thing is that Morgan didn't need to explain himself. He didn't need to justify his actions or defend his decision. The interview spoke for itself. Anyone who watched it could see exactly what happened and why he left. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Lara was out of line, and Morgan responded accordingly. That's the power of integrity. When you live your life with principles, when you treat others the way you want to be treated, when you stand up for what's right, you don't need to justify yourself. Your actions speak louder than any words ever could. And Morgan's actions that day spoke volumes. What Lara failed to understand is that age brings wisdom, experience, perspective. The things she tried to use against Morgan, his years in the industry, his long career, those are assets, not liabilities. They're proof of his talent, his staying power, his ability to remain relevant across decades of change in Hollywood. But she saw them as weaknesses to exploit. And that says everything about her character and nothing about his. The fact that Morgan kept his composure for as long as he did is a testament to his patience. Lesser people would have walked out much sooner, but he gave her chances, multiple chances to course correct, to steer the interview back to respectful territory. She ignored every single one of those chances. She kept pushing until there was nowhere left to push. And then she had the audacity to act surprised when he left, to act like he was the one being unreasonable. That's what entitled people do. They push and push and push, and then when someone finally pushes back, they play the victim. How dare you set boundaries with me? Don't you know who I am? It's a tale as old as time, and it never stops being infuriating to watch. But Morgan didn't engage with that. He didn't argue or defend or explain. He just left. And in doing so, he maintained the moral high ground. He showed that you don't have to participate in someone else's drama. You can simply opt out. You can walk away. And sometimes that's the most powerful statement you can make. The ripples from that interview will last forever. Every time someone interviews Morgan Freeman from now on, they'll remember what happened. They'll be careful, respectful, thoughtful with their questions, not because they're afraid he'll walk out, but because they saw what happens when you're not. They saw the embarrassment, the backlash, the humiliation that comes from treating someone badly on national television. And every time Lara Spencer conducts an interview from now on, she'll have to live with what she did. She'll have to carry the weight of that moment, that choice, that complete failure of judgment and character. Whether that changes her or not remains to be seen, but the stain of it will never fully wash away. This is what happens when someone who thinks they're untouchable meets someone who truly is. Morgan Freeman's legacy is secure. His place in history is guaranteed. Nothing Lara said or did in that interview could change that. But her legacy? That's been forever altered by this moment. She'll always be the host who drove Morgan Freeman off her show. That's her claim to fame now. The conversation we should be having is about accountability in media, about how hosts treat their guests, about the line between asking tough questions and being deliberately hurtful, about respect and professionalism and basic human decency. That's the real story here. Not that Morgan Freeman walked off a show, but why he felt he had no other choice. Every person who watched that interview will take something different from it. Some will see it as entertainment, as drama, as a viral moment to share and discuss. Others will see it as a cautionary tale about the consequences of arrogance and disrespect. And some will see it as inspiration, as proof that you can stand up for yourself no matter who you're facing or where you are. But everyone will remember it. Everyone will remember the day Morgan Freeman said enough. The day he chose himself over someone else's show. The day he walked away from disrespect with his head held high and his dignity intact. That's the legacy of this moment. Not shame, but strength. Not controversy, but courage. Not drama, but dignity.